While I lay in the hospital bed, weak and scared, I couldn't understand why Jason wasn't by my side. He had always seemed loving, the kind of husband who would hold my hand through anything, but now he barely came to visit. The nurses were kind, and my friends called often, but it wasn't the same as having the person you trust most in the world right there with you. I felt a knot of worry every time I saw someone else walk in the room, hoping it was him, only to be disappointed. The doctors had told me that recovery would take time, and each day was exhausting. I had always been strong, handling everything on my own, but lying there, dependent on others for even the smallest things, made me realize how fragile life can be. And Jason's absence made that fragility hit even harder. I tried to focus on getting better, telling myself he must be busy, but deep down, I felt a growing unease. His calls were brief, distant, almost indifferent. Something didn't feel right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being abandoned at the moment I needed him most. In those quiet hours, I replayed our life together. The early mornings rushing to work, the nights spent planning our future, the little moments that made me think we were partners in everything. But now, each memory felt like a lie. How could someone who once promised forever suddenly act like I was invisible? The betrayal stung deeper than any illness could. I realized that I was facing more than just a health crisis. I was facing the truth about someone I loved. Maya, my nurse, noticed the change in me. She stayed a little longer, listening when I needed to talk, offering a gentle smile when I felt scared. I clung to her support, but my heart ached for Jason. Every time he didn't come, every time his excuses sounded hollow, the pain grew sharper. I wanted to call him out, to ask why he had changed, but I didn't have the energy. All I could do was lie there, trying to focus on healing, while a storm of emotions raged inside me. Then, in the midst of my despair, a thought struck me. I wasn't helpless. I had built a life for myself, quietly and carefully, and there were things Jason didn't know. Things that could change everything if I chose to reveal them. That little spark of hope became my anchor. I wasn't just the woman in the hospital bed. I was Claire Thompson, strong, capable, and ready to take back control. Even if Jason had walked away, I could rise again, and this time, no one could ever underestimate me. As I drifted into a restless sleep that night, I promised myself something. I would get better, not just for me, but to show that no betrayal could break my spirit. I would face this challenge head-on, and when the time was right, I would let the world see that the woman they thought was helpless had power they could never imagine. Jason walked into my hospital room one afternoon with a look I had never seen before, cold, distant, almost calculating. He didn't sit beside me as he usually did. Instead, he stood near the door, shifting nervously. I asked him what was wrong, hoping it was just stress or worry about me. But then he said the words that felt like a punch to my chest. He wanted a fresh start. He admitted he was leaving me. Right there, while I was weak, struggling to even lift myself from the bed, he decided I wasn't worth fighting for. I couldn't understand it. I kept thinking of every late night I had stayed awake when he was sick, every time I had supported his dreams, every sacrifice I had made for our life together. And now, he was abandoning me when I needed him most. It was worse than any pain my body had felt. The betrayal wasn't just in his words. It was in his actions, in the way his parents had been visiting under the guise of concern but subtly siding with him, whispering that I was difficult or too demanding. Their approval of his decision made me feel smaller, like I was nothing without their validation. Anger bubbled inside me, but it was tangled with confusion and heartbreak. How could someone I trusted so deeply turn away when I was most vulnerable? I replayed the conversation over and over in my mind, searching for a reason, any reason that made sense. There wasn't one. Jason had made his choice, and I was left trying to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the one standing in front of me. Maya, the nurse who had been helping me with my recovery, noticed my mood shift. She came to sit beside me when Jason left, holding my hand gently. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly. She didn't try to offer empty comfort. Instead, she listened as I poured out the mix of sadness and fury I couldn't yet express to anyone else. Her presence reminded me that I wasn't completely alone, that there were people who cared about me for me, not for what I had or who I was married to. With her support, I started to realize that Jason's betrayal, as painful as it was, didn't define me. I could feel my anger sharpening, yes, but also my resolve. I didn't want revenge out of spite yet. I wanted clarity, strength, and the knowledge that I could survive this without him. Each day with Maya helping me felt like a small step toward reclaiming my own power, even while my heart ached. By the time the evening came, I understood one thing clearly. Jason had chosen his path, but I still had mine. His abandonment was a wound, but it was also a wake-up call. With Maya by my side, I could begin to see that I didn't need anyone's approval to move forward. And somewhere in that realization, a quiet fire began to grow. A fire that would guide me toward the life I deserved, far away from his betrayal. As the days passed in the quiet of my hospital room, I had a lot of time to think. The betrayal from Jason weighed heavily on me, but somewhere under the sadness, a small, surprising thought began to grow. I remembered the savings I had quietly built over the years. Money Jason had no idea existed. I had been careful, putting away a little from my salary, making smart investments, always planning for the future. I realized I had over $250,000 tucked away, completely independent of him. For the first time since he had walked out, I felt a flicker of hope. Lying there, I imagined what this money could mean. I wasn't just someone left behind in a hospital bed. I had the means to take control of my life again. I could move forward on my own terms. The thought made my chest tighten with both fear and excitement. Fear, because I had never had to stand completely on my own before. Excitement, because I suddenly understood I had power Jason could never have taken from me, no matter how he tried. I started planning quietly, thinking step by step. First, I needed to focus on recovery. Without my health, nothing else mattered. Then, I could use my savings to secure my independence, a place of my own, a fresh start, a life that wasn't tied to him or his selfish choices. I imagined opening a bank account in my name, signing papers for a new apartment, and slowly reclaiming the control I had felt slipping away. Every thought of what I could do made me feel lighter, stronger. I began to see a path where my life was no longer defined by Jason's choices. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't about revenge. I didn't need to humiliate him or prove anything to the world. What mattered was my dignity, my sense of self-worth. I deserved to live with confidence, to show myself that even in the darkest moments I could rise. The idea of justice for myself, simply living better and stronger than before, felt more powerful than any plot to get back at him. Maya noticed the change in me. The quiet fire in my eyes, the small smile when I talked about plans for after the hospital. She didn't need to know all the details, but she supported me, encouraged me to focus on myself, and reminded me that this was my moment to reclaim my life. By the end of that week, I felt a shift. I wasn't just the woman betrayed and abandoned. I was Claire Thompson, capable, resourceful, and ready. Jason had underestimated me. But now I had a plan, a secret weapon he never knew existed, and a determination to rebuild my life with strength and pride. It wasn't about getting back at him. It was about showing myself that no one could ever take away my dignity or my power. Jason seemed to carry himself differently after leaving me. The once worried and attentive husband had transformed into someone arrogant, walking around as if the world owed him something. He assumed that by leaving me while I was weak, he had secured an easy path to comfort and freedom. What he didn't know was that his plan had overlooked a very important fact. I wasn't powerless, and I had resources he could never touch. I started hearing about his new lifestyle through mutual acquaintances. He was spending freely, flaunting a flashy new car, dining at expensive restaurants, and introducing a new woman he seemed smitten with. She was charming and beautiful, someone who made him look even more careless and self-absorbed. Every story I heard, every boast he made in front of others, felt like a slap in the face. I could see the man I thought I knew disappearing into someone unrecognizable. His confidence was false, built on the illusion that he had won by leaving me behind. Inside me, a storm of emotions raged. Hurt, anger, disbelief, but also a growing sense of clarity. I realized that Jason's arrogance was his weakness. He had assumed I would crumble, that I would have nothing once he walked away. And while my heart ached, I began to focus on what I could control. I didn't need to rush or confront him. Instead, I quietly began thinking about every step I could take to reclaim my life, to turn the tables without anyone realizing it yet. Each day, I reminded myself to stay composed. Seeing him flaunt his new life made my chest tighten, but I refused to let it show. I channeled the energy that came from betrayal into planning. My secret savings and investments gave me a foundation, and I started imagining the changes I could make once I left the hospital. A new apartment, a stable financial future, independence, all without anyone, including Jason, interfering. Maya noticed the tension in me, but also the shift in my mindset. She encouraged me to focus on recovery first, reminding me that patience was part of building strength. I realized she was right. There was no need to rush. My actions would speak louder than any words or confrontations. Watching Jason flaunt his false confidence only fueled my determination to rise above him, not out of spite, but to prove to myself that I could thrive regardless of his choices. By the time I was well enough to start planning seriously, I felt a quiet power growing inside me. Jason thought he had the upper hand, but he had underestimated one simple truth. I was not the same woman he left behind. I had resources, intelligence, and the patience to use both wisely. His arrogance blinded him to my potential, and that blindness was the first step in my journey to reclaiming my life. Once I was fully discharged from the hospital, I decided it was time to take the first step toward reclaiming my life. I quietly used the $250,000 I had saved over the years to secure my independence. I found a small but beautiful apartment in a part of town I had always loved. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a fresh start, a space where I could rebuild myself without Jason's shadow looming over me. Every detail I planned, from the furniture to the little touches that made it feel like home, reminded me that this life was mine to shape. I also made smart investments with a portion of the money. I researched carefully, choosing options that would grow steadily over time. Each financial decision felt like a brick in the foundation of my new life. I realized, with every move I made, that I didn't need Jason or anyone else to survive or thrive. For the first time in months, I felt a quiet pride. The fear and helplessness that had consumed me in the hospital were fading, replaced by control and confidence. Then one afternoon, Jason called. I hesitated for a moment, feeling the old pang of hurt, but I reminded myself how far I had come. I answered, keeping my voice calm and neutral. He spoke with an awkward charm, trying to reconnect, to explain his side, as if leaving me had been no big deal. He didn't know anything about my savings, my new apartment, or the life I had quietly started building. I just wanted to see how you're doing, he said. I took a deep breath. I'm doing well, Jason, I replied softly, holding a steady tone. I'm focused on myself right now, and I need to keep it that way. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear him searching for words, realizing that I was no longer the vulnerable woman he had abandoned. I didn't offer more, didn't explain, didn't plead. My silence spoke louder than any argument could. When I hung up, I felt an unexpected rush of empowerment. I had just shown him, gently but firmly, that leaving me had not broken me. If anything, it had forced me to discover my own strength. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new life. Every small victory, the first night in my apartment, setting up my own finances, decorating the space exactly how I wanted, reinforced a truth I had been slowly learning. I could thrive on my own. Jason's absence no longer haunted me. Instead, it reminded me that I didn't need his approval or presence to succeed. I realized that the first step of my revenge wasn't about anger or confrontation. It was about quietly building a life so strong, so independent, that Jason could never undo it. And with every passing day, I felt that power growing. I wasn't the woman he left behind. I was someone stronger, wiser, and unstoppable. I started hearing things about Jason from mutual acquaintances, bits and pieces that painted a picture I couldn't ignore. He was bragging to his friends about how easy it had been to leave me, how he thought he had made the smartest decision of his life. Every detail I overheard or was told made my blood boil at first. He believed he had won, that abandoning me while I was vulnerable had given him the upper hand. But as the initial sting of anger faded, a new thought took hold. If he thought leaving me was simple, then he had seriously underestimated me. I realized it was time to show, quietly and effectively, that I was far from broken. I began making deliberate moves to outshine him in the social and financial circles we had once shared. I started by connecting with professionals and acquaintances who had always admired my dedication and intelligence. I didn't flaunt my achievements, but I made them visible in subtle ways, successfully managing my investments, expanding my freelance work, and taking steps to grow my career. People began to notice that I was thriving on my own, and slowly, word spread about my independence and progress. At the same time, I attended social gatherings where Jason's friends were present. I kept my demeanor calm and confident, sharing updates about my work and accomplishments without mentioning him. It was satisfying to see some surprise on their faces, the realization that I was not only surviving but excelling. Jason, of course, had no idea that I had been quietly reclaiming my life, and his arrogance blinded him to the changes happening right under his nose. I felt a growing sense of satisfaction every time I heard that Jason was starting to feel uncertain. He began to notice subtle shifts. People who had once sided with him now looked at me with admiration, curious about the woman who had taken control of her life so gracefully. It was a quiet, powerful revenge. I didn't need to confront him or call him out. Life itself was showing him the consequences of underestimating me. As the weeks passed, I felt more confident than ever. Jason's miscalculation was clear. He thought abandoning me would leave me weak and dependent, but instead, it had forced me to awaken a strength I hadn't fully realized. I was building a life that was not only independent, but impressive in ways he couldn't ignore. By the time I reflected on it, I realized something important. True satisfaction didn't come from making him feel small. It came from proving to myself that I could rise above betrayal. Jason had thought he had the upper hand, but in reality, he had set the stage for my growth. Every step I took was a reminder that underestimating me had been his biggest mistake. As my confidence grew, I decided it was time to let the world see what I had quietly built. I started attending gatherings and events where Jason and our mutual acquaintances were present. I didn't announce anything loudly or try to show off, but I let my success speak for itself. People began noticing my independence, my new apartment, the smart investments I had made, the way I carried myself with calm confidence. Word traveled quickly, and soon I heard that Jason was hearing about it through friends. The man who had thought leaving me would give him an easy, carefree life was now confronted with a reality he hadn't anticipated. He discovered that I wasn't the helpless, vulnerable woman he had assumed I was. Instead, I had not only survived his betrayal but had thrived, quietly building a life that he could never control. Seeing his reaction, even from a distance, gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. I didn't need to humiliate him or confront him directly. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone but myself. Life itself was teaching him a lesson, one that no argument or fight could deliver. The shock on his face when people casually mentioned my success told me he was finally realizing his mistake. He had misjudged me completely. Each time I reflected on it, I felt a quiet power growing inside me. I had been hurt deeply, abandoned at my most vulnerable, but I had turned that pain into motivation. Instead of letting betrayal define me, I had used it as a push to create something lasting and meaningful. Every small victory, from managing my finances to achieving personal milestones, reminded me that I didn't need him or anyone else to validate my worth. At social events, I noticed the subtle glances Jason gave me. They weren't hostile or angry. They were filled with a mix of disbelief and regret. I didn't acknowledge them. I smiled politely at friends and shared stories of my progress, letting my life itself tell the story of my resilience. It was enough. The lesson had been delivered without a word from me, and it was far more satisfying than any argument could have been. For the first time in months, I felt completely in control. Jason's absence had forced me to discover my strength, and now that strength was visible to everyone. I realized that true revenge wasn't about hurting someone. It was about reclaiming your life, living with dignity, and letting the consequences of their actions naturally unfold. By the end of that period, I felt a sense of closure building inside me. I had taken the betrayal that once felt crushing and turned it into a source of empowerment. Jason had assumed he had the upper hand, but the truth was clear. I had risen stronger, smarter, and completely independent. Life had done the work of showing him his mistake, and I had emerged victorious without compromising my values or integrity. With the foundation I had quietly built, I began to fully step into a new life. I decided to start a small business, something I had always dreamed of, but never had the courage or time to pursue. Using part of my savings, I opened a boutique consultancy, helping people with financial planning and investments, the very skills I had relied on to regain control of my life. Watching the business grow gave me a sense of pride I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about money. It was about proving to myself that I could create and sustain something meaningful on my own. Along the way, I met people who genuinely valued me for who I was, not for my past relationship or any material success. These friendships became a support system I hadn't realized I needed. There were colleagues who encouraged my ideas, neighbors who celebrated small victories, and clients who trusted me to guide them. Every interaction reminded me that I was not defined by Jason's choices or the betrayal I had endured. I was being seen for my talent, intelligence, and resilience. Maya remained a close presence in my life, a reminder of how kindness and support can make a difference when you feel weakest. She celebrated my successes with genuine joy and offered advice when I doubted myself. With her and my new friends around me, I realized how much strength comes from being surrounded by people who lift you up instead of tearing you down. It was a stark contrast to the world I had known with Jason, where manipulation and selfishness had dominated. Every day brought a new opportunity to grow. I reflected on how far I had come, from the woman lying in a hospital bed feeling abandoned, to someone running a business, managing her finances independently, and being admired for her determination. The lessons I had learned were clear. Betrayal can hurt, but it can also awaken strength you didn't know existed. Independence isn't just financial, it's emotional, mental, and personal. I felt a deep sense of empowerment in knowing that I had reclaimed my life entirely. My confidence wasn't built on proving anything to Jason anymore. It was built on my own achievements and my understanding of my worth. I had discovered that resilience isn't about avoiding pain. It's about using it as fuel to create a better, stronger version of yourself. Looking back, I realized that the struggles I had endured were not the end of my story. They were the beginning of a life I could fully own. Each day I flourished, each new connection I formed, and each success I achieved reinforced that I had turned a dark chapter into one of growth and self-empowerment. I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was the author of my own life, and that realization brought a peace and strength I had never felt before. Months after I had fully settled into my new life, I began hearing rumors about Jason. He had started facing struggles he hadn't anticipated. Financial setbacks, bad business decisions, and a lifestyle that suddenly felt unsustainable. People who once admired him were now questioning his choices. I felt a flicker of curiosity at first, but it was nothing like the pain I had felt before. I was no longer emotionally dependent on him, and I realized that his troubles didn't define me or affect my life. I saw him once at a mutual event. From across the room, he looked stressed and uncertain, the arrogance I had once hated replaced by visible tension. He seemed smaller somehow, weighed down by consequences he had never expected. Meanwhile, I stood confidently with my friends and colleagues, laughing, sharing stories about my work, and feeling fully in control of my life. The contrast was undeniable. He had assumed leaving me would make him unstoppable, but it was I who had grown stronger while he stumbled. Watching him from a distance, I felt no desire to humiliate him or confront him. I didn't need to. Life had naturally balanced the scales. His regret was visible, but it didn't bring me satisfaction in the way revenge might have if I had acted out of spite. Instead, I felt a calm sense of closure. I had already achieved something far more powerful: independence, resilience, and the knowledge that I could thrive no matter what he did. That moment made me reflect deeply. Revenge isn't about causing someone else pain. It's about reclaiming yourself, your dignity, and your happiness. I had learned that living your best life, being unstoppable in the face of betrayal, and creating your own success is the truest form of justice. Jason's mistakes and setbacks were consequences of his own choices, not my actions, and that made them even more fitting. I realized that my journey had taught me lessons far beyond financial independence. I had discovered my strength, patience, and the ability to rise from heartbreak without losing myself. The betrayal that had once threatened to break me had instead fueled my growth. I had transformed my pain into motivation, my sadness into determination, and my loss into empowerment. By the end of that evening, I felt a quiet sense of triumph. I wasn't defined by Jason, by his arrogance, or by the life he thought he could take from me. I had built something lasting, something real, and it wasn't dependent on anyone else. Life itself had delivered the lesson, and I had learned that the best revenge is not bitterness or confrontation. It is becoming unstoppable, confident, and fully alive. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. I had been betrayed, abandoned, and underestimated, but none of it had stopped me. I had taken control of my life, and in doing so, I had found something far greater than any fleeting satisfaction of revenge: peace, strength, and the knowledge that I could face any challenge and thrive. Looking back on everything that had happened, I could hardly believe the journey I had been through. From the moment Jason walked out of my life while I was vulnerable, to the days I spent quietly rebuilding myself, it had been a path full of pain, growth, and ultimately empowerment. I realized that no one could break me if I refused to let them define my worth. My strength, independence, and dignity had carried me through the darkest moments, and in the end, they had won. My revenge had never been about anger or confrontation. I had never sought to humiliate Jason or make him suffer. Instead, my revenge was silent, powerful, and personal. It was in the life I built from scratch, the confidence I reclaimed, and the pride I felt in knowing that I could survive and thrive on my own. Every decision I made, every step I took toward independence, was a quiet statement that I would not be a victim of betrayal. That realization brought me a peace I had never expected. I thought about how far I had come. I had transformed from someone dependent and heartbroken into a woman who was fully capable of managing her life, finances, and happiness. I had built meaningful relationships with people who valued me for who I was. I had created a career, a home, and a life that reflected my own choices and effort. Each achievement was a reminder that my actions mattered more than anyone else's opinions or mistakes. Most importantly, I learned that betrayal does not define a person. Pain and heartbreak can shape you, but they do not determine your future. Growth, resilience, and determination do. I had taken every challenge thrown at me and turned it into an opportunity to prove to myself that I could rise above it. And that realization, more than anything, gave me a sense of freedom and empowerment that no one could take away. Now, when I think of Jason and the life he had tried to control, I feel nothing but clarity. He made choices that affected him, not me. I no longer carry resentment, only the understanding that life has a way of teaching lessons. My lesson had been in discovering my own worth and realizing that independence and self-respect are far more satisfying than any fleeting moment of revenge. I hope that anyone listening to my story understands this. Betrayal may hurt, but it can also awaken strength you never knew existed. Your value is not determined by someone else's actions or abandonment. What matters is how you respond, how you rebuild, and how you allow yourself to grow. My story is proof that living better, stronger, and with dignity is the ultimate triumph. They thought they could break me, but I wasn't broken. I was unstoppable, empowered, and at peace. And that, more than anything, was the real victory.